Rain hammered against the thin window panes of the tiny apartment, a relentless rhythm that echoed the frantic beat of Elena Marquez's heart. The room smelled faintly of warm milk and damp fabric, the air heavy with exhaustion as she rocked her newborn son against her chest. Mateo's cries were sharp, trembling, almost desperate, the kind of sound that shredded a mother's soul one breath at a time. Her arms ached, her eyes burned, and the world around her had shrunk into the small, suffocating space where fear and love lived side by side. Midnight had long passed, yet the darkness felt unending, as if the night itself refused to let her go. She whispered to him, begged him, pleaded with him, but nothing eased his cry. Before we begin this story, tell us, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now let's begin. Elena tightened her shawl around her shoulders, pressing Mateo closer as his tiny fist trembled against her collarbone. She tried humming, then swaying, then walking circles in the cramped living room, but the crying only grew harsher. A cold draft seeped through the gaps in the door, rattling her nerves. She checked the clock on the wall. 2:03 a.m. The same hour he always cried the hardest. The hour her loneliness felt loudest. The hour her thoughts turned toward the man who had walked away before even knowing she carried his child. She hated that part the most, the wondering. The wondering if he would have cared. The wondering if she would ever feel safe again. A sudden knock struck the door. She froze mid-step, her breath trapped in her throat. No one visited at this hour. No one even knew she lived here, not anymore. She stayed still for 3 long seconds, then 5, praying silently for the knocking to go away. But it came again, harder this time, more insistent, as if the night itself demanded an audience. Mateo's cries wavered, turning into soft hiccups as he pressed his face into her shoulder. Elena Marquez, a low, controlled voice called from the other side. Open the door. Her blood turned cold. Every instinct screamed that she should stay silent, that danger waited on the other side. But there was something else in the voice. Something oddly calm beneath the authority. Something that made her knees weak in a different way. She stepped carefully toward the door, heartbeat fluttering like frightened wings. Who is it? She whispered. There was a pause. Then the answer came, smooth as thunder and just as undeniable. Adrian D'Angelo. Her hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the baby. The name alone carried weight. The kind of weight whispered in alleys, written in police files, and spoken only when necessary. The D'Angelo mafia family ruled the city's underworld with a quiet ruthlessness, and Adrian was the man no one crossed. She had never met him, had no reason to, yet he stood outside her door at 2 a.m. Please, I don't understand, she managed. Why are you here? Another silence. Then, your child won't stop crying. Her breath hitched. He shouldn't have known, couldn't have, unless. Before fear could claw deeper into her, another small miracle. The apartment fell quiet. Mateo's cries faded into tiny, curious whimpers, then silence. Elena blinked, stunned. She had fought for hours, and now, with a stranger's voice in the hallway, he had gone still. Driven by an instinct she couldn't explain, she unlocked the door. When the door opened, she found herself staring up into eyes the color of storm clouds. Heavy, dangerous, unreadable. Adrian D'Angelo stood with rain sliding down his black coat, shadows clinging to him like an old habit. His face was carved from something stronger than stone, marked by a faint scar along his jaw that made him look even more untouchable. This was a man who had never been denied anything in his life, a man who carried power like it was part of his skin. And yet, as his gaze landed on the baby cradled in her arms, something shifted in him. Barely, but unmistakably. "May I come in?" he asked. Every warning she'd ever heard pressed against her ribs. But Matteo let out a soft whimper, reaching tiny fingers toward Adrian as if recognizing him. The sound tore something inside her. Against her better judgment, she stepped aside. Adrian entered with a quiet authority that filled the small apartment entirely. He removed his gloves slowly, eyes never leaving the child. For a moment, he didn't speak. He simply stood close enough for Eleanor to feel the heat of him, the electricity of danger wrapped in elegance. "Why? Why are you here?" she whispered. He lowered his head slightly toward Matteo, voice dipping into a tone so gentle it contradicted every rumor she'd ever heard about him. "He was crying for too long," Adrian murmured. Her breath trembled. "How do you know that?" Instead of answering, he lifted a hand, giving her enough time to pull away if she wished. She didn't. Something in the moment held her still. His fingertips brushed lightly against Matteo's back, and the baby melted into silence, breath slowing, tiny body relaxing as if he had been waiting for the touch. Elena stared in disbelief. "No," she whispered. This isn't possible." Adrian stepped closer, his presence towering but strangely warm. He leaned near the baby, voice dropping to a whisper meant only for him. "Come to me." Matteo's hand reached for him again. A sound rose in Eleanor's throat, part fear, part awe, part confusion she couldn't name. Everything she knew about her life, her past, her child, threatened to shift under her feet. Adrian straightened, eyes dark, unreadable. "There are things you need to know," he said quietly, "and we don't have much time." The rain outside intensified, wind sweeping against the building as if warning her that the night would not end gently. Eleanor clutched her baby closer, pulse racing with questions she wasn't ready to speak aloud. But she only managed one. "What do you want from us?" Adrian's gaze softened, the smallest fracture in his otherwise impenetrable armor. "Not what you fear," he said, "but what's coming for you will not stop." A chill ran down her spine. Her world had broken long before tonight, but something told her it was only just beginning to shatter, piece by piece, until the truth crawled out from beneath the darkness and changed everything. And as Matteo rested quietly, impossibly quiet against her chest, Eleanor knew one thing for certain. Nothing about this night was accidental. Nothing about this man was coincidence. Her life had just collided with the one person she should never have opened her door to. Yet somehow, she couldn't bring herself to close it again. Elena stood in the narrow space between her living room and the doorway, trying to steady her breath as Adrian D'Angelo's presence filled the apartment, like something both dangerous and strangely inevitable. Matteo slept now, impossibly calm against her shoulder, as if the storm of his cries had never happened. Adrian's gaze kept drifting to the child. Not with softness exactly, but with a kind of silent recognition that unsettled her more than anything else. She tightened her hold on Matteo, though part of her wondered if she was trying to protect the baby. Or herself. The rain outside had softened into a steady whisper, a low murmur against the walls that seemed to seal them inside the moment. The dim lamp behind her cast a warm halo over the room, but it couldn't chase away the shadows collecting around Adrian's shoulders. He looked like someone who had walked out of another world. A darker, sharper one she never wanted to be part of. Yet here he was, standing barely a breath away from her, watching her with a patience she didn't understand. "You still haven't told me why you're here," she whispered. He shifted slightly, removing the last trace of rain from his gloves before setting them on the side table. "If your child's father were not already entangled with my world," he said quietly, "I would not be standing in your doorway at 2 a.m. Her lungs froze. Matteo stirred faintly, and she rocked him until he relaxed again, but her own pulse refused to calm. "What do you know about him?" she asked, though the question scraped painfully inside her. About the man who left us?" Adrian's eyes lifted to hers with slow precision. "More than you do." She flinched at the honesty. She wasn't ready to hear this. Not tonight. Not when she was barely holding herself together. But something about Adrian, his steady calm, the way his voice anchored the air, forced her to listen. "You should be careful who you trust," Adrian continued. "The wrong name can put you in danger without you realizing it." Her fingers trembled as she traced soft circles on Matteo's back. "I don't trust anyone," she whispered. "Not anymore." A flicker of emotion passed through Adrian's eyes, brief but unmistakable. "Good," he murmured. "Then maybe you'll listen?" He walked past her slowly, not asking permission this time, as though he already had it. His presence shifted the air around her, drawing her forward despite every alarm ringing in her mind. She watched him study her apartment. The peeling wallpaper, the second-hand sofa, the shelf crowded with baby bottles and folded blankets. This life was fragile, barely held together, and she hated how visible that became under his silent scrutiny. "You're not safe here," he said simply. "I've been managing," she whispered, though the words tasted thin. Managing is what people say when they're drowning slowly. Her chest tightened. She hated that he saw through her so easily. She hated that he noticed at all. "Elena," he said, turning back to her, "there are men looking for you. Not because of who you are, but because of a mistake someone else made. A mistake tied to the name you once trusted." Her voice broke. "Why are you telling me this? You don't even know me." He stepped closer, not aggressively, but with a certainty that forced her heart into a rapid, trembling rhythm. "I know enough," he said softly. "I know you've been watched for weeks. I know someone broke into your building 2 nights ago, and you told no one. I know you take different routes home every day, even when you don't realize you're doing it. And I know your child cries the hardest when he senses fear in you." The breath left her lungs in a shaky exhale. She hadn't told a soul about the incident in the hallway. She had brushed off the footsteps behind her as paranoia. She had forced herself to believe she was safe because the alternative was too frightening. But Adrian's words made everything real. "How do you know all this?" she whispered, voice barely a thread. "Because I've had men protecting you," he answered just as quietly. "Long before tonight." Her knees almost buckled. "Why? Why would you do that?" Adrian looked at Matteo then. The soft, gentle rise of his small chest, the peaceful expression that made the apartment feel like another world entirely. When he finally spoke, his voice had changed. Lower. Rougher. Weighted with something she didn't dare interpret. "Because your child is connected to something larger than you understand. And because the man who created that connection is someone you should have never spoken to." A tremor ran through her. Her past had been a place of broken dreams and shattered trust. But she had never imagined it reaching into the shadows Adrian lived in. She swallowed hard, clutching Matteo as if the truth might steal him away. "What do I do now?" she whispered. Adrian's voice softened into something dangerously close to reassurance. "For tonight, nothing. Keep him close. Keep your doors locked. And if anything feels wrong." He stepped close enough that she felt the warmth of his breath near her temple. "You call my name, and I will come." Her world tilted, breath catching in her chest as if the ground beneath her had shifted again, deeper this time, into territory she didn't know how to escape. Adrian moved toward the door, pausing only once to look back. "I'll be close," he said, "whether you see me or not." When the door closed behind him, the apartment fell silent, but a silence that carried a new heaviness, a new meaning. Elena pressed her lips to Matteo's forehead, whispering a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "We're safe," she murmured. But the memory of Adrian's warning lingered like a shadow in her mind. A name she should never have spoken, a world she never meant to enter, and a man who seemed to know exactly why her baby only stopped crying when he was near. The apartment felt colder after Adrian left, as if the warmth he carried with him had been the only thing keeping the night from swallowing the room whole. Elena locked the door, checked it twice, then a third time without meaning to. Matteo slept against her shoulder, peaceful in a way he rarely was, his breath warm and steady on her skin. She should have felt relief. Instead, her nerves trembled like thin glass, each breath thinner than the last. She walked slowly to the sofa and sat down, afraid that any sudden movement might shatter the fragile quiet he'd left behind. The shadows on the walls seemed deeper now, stretching longer, as though Adrian's warning had opened a door she never meant to look through. She rested her cheek against Matteo's soft hair and tried to quiet her thoughts. Adrian said he had men watching her, that someone had broken in 2 nights ago, that the wrong people were looking for her child. She wanted to believe it was a mistake, that Adrian had misunderstood something or been fed false information. But deep inside, she knew he hadn't. The strange footsteps she heard last week, the feeling of being followed, the muffled voices in the hallway. She'd tried to dismiss them, to convince herself she was just tired, imagining danger where none existed. But now she couldn't lie to herself. She looked around the cramped apartment, peeling wallpaper, leaky pipes, and the old wooden dresser she'd repainted 3 times. Nothing about this place felt connected to the world Adrian lived in. Nothing about her life should have mattered to a man like him. And yet, he had said her name in a way that suggested he knew she mattered more than she realized. A soft creak outside made her stiffen. She held her breath, listening. The building was old. The floors always groaned. But this sound, this was different. Slow. Deliberate. Someone trying to be quiet. Her pulse quickened, a dull throb echoing through her chest. She rose carefully, holding Matteo close, and moved toward the kitchen window. The lights in the hallway flickered faintly, dancing across the cracked floorboards. She waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Then the footsteps disappeared. She tried to calm herself, but fear slid under her skin like ice. She barely slept that night. Each sound, a distant car horn, the wind against the windows, the plumbing in the walls, made her sit upright. Matteo stirred every so often, but instead of crying, he fussed softly, almost restlessly, as though sensing something in the air. She rocked him gently, whispering to him, wishing she could believe the lies she whispered for comfort. Morning light finally bled through the curtains, dim and gray from the lingering storm. Elena forced herself into motion, washed a bottle, warmed milk, changed Matteo, opened the curtains to let in the weak brightness. The normalcy felt fragile, stretched thin over the anxiety twisting inside her. She brewed coffee, though her stomach knotted too tightly to drink it. She had barely taken 2 steps toward the table when the doorknob rattled. Her heart leapt up into her throat. Someone was at her door. Someone trying it quietly, testing it. She froze, clutching Matteo to her chest, backing away slowly. The footsteps shifted, a faint scrape along the floor outside her door. Then the breathing, low, muffled, close. Adrian's warning echoed back through her mind. She moved quickly to the bedroom, closing the door soundlessly, pressing her back against it as she struggled to keep her breath steady. Matteo whimpered, sensing her fear. She kissed his forehead, begging him silently to stay calm. The footsteps lingered. Then, a quiet tap on her door. Not gentle, not friendly. Testing her. Her phone was on the counter in the kitchen. Too far. She shut her eyes, gripping Mateo tighter, the weight of him grounding her even as her body shook. Minutes crawled by. The tapping stopped. Silence. Then the footsteps retreated down the hall. She waited longer still, listening for anything. A return, a whisper, a shadow beneath the door. Nothing came. When she finally dared to emerge, her legs trembled beneath her. The hallway was empty when she peered through the peephole, but a slip of paper rested on the floor, pushed under the edge of her door. Her breath hitched. She crouched slowly, picked it up with trembling fingers. 2 words were scribbled across it in hurried ink. Found you. Her body went cold. Mateo stirred, sensing the shift in her heartbeat. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed the number Adrian had left on her counter the night before. A number she hadn't intended to use. The moment she placed the phone to her ear, a voice answered before it even rang. Elena. Her breath broke. Someone was here. Someone left a note. The sound of movement on the other end, fast and sharp. Don't open the door. Don't go near the windows. Step away from all entry points. I am, she whispered, pressing her back against the wall. I'm 2 minutes away, he said. Stay where you are. He didn't hang up. Neither did she. She listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing, deep, controlled, powerful, as though borrowing calm from him. Mateo rested his small hand on her arm, grounding her as she rocked him gently. Then the sound of footsteps running up the building stairs, heavy, sure steps that didn't bother hiding. A moment later, her door trembled under a firm knock. She knew instantly it was him. Eleanor, Adrian's voice called, low and direct. She unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see him standing there, eyes blazing with a controlled fury she hadn't seen before. 2 men in black suits stood behind him, scanning the hallway with sharp, calculating eyes. Show me, Adrian said quietly. She handed him the note. His jaw tightened, eyes darkening in a way that made her pulse race. He turned to his men, voice dropping into a cold command that chilled the air. Find who was here. Now. They moved swiftly, disappearing down the hallway. Adrian stepped inside, closing the door behind him. The moment the lock clicked, a strange sense of relief rushed through her. The kind she didn't want to admit she felt. Adrian approached her slowly, eyes scanning her face, the tension in her shoulders, the way she held Mateo protectively. You did the right thing calling me, he said softly, in a tone almost meant only for her. I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. His gaze softened, not visibly, but enough that her knees felt weak. From now on, Adrian murmured, you don't face danger alone. Her breath trembled as his words wrapped around her like a vow she didn't understand yet. A warning wrapped in protection, a promise that would tie their fates closer than she ever meant them to be. And in that moment, as he stood between her and the world outside, she realized the danger was no longer only on the other side of her door. It was right here, in the way her heart reacted to the man who had just given her her first warning. Adrian didn't speak for several long seconds after reading the note again, though he had already memorized every shaky stroke of ink. The stillness around him didn't feel like calm. It felt like a storm waiting for a place to break. Elena stood by the sofa holding Mateo close, her breath trembling as she tried to make sense of what her life had become in less than 12 hours. One night ago, she had been just a tired mother trying to quiet her newborn's cries. Now she was standing in front of the most feared man in the city, while someone she couldn't see hunted her in the shadows. Adrian lifted his gaze to her, and she felt the full weight of it. Protective, unreadable, and heavy with a decision he hadn't yet spoken. "You can't stay here," he said, finally. Her heart jumped. "Adrian!" "There's no negotiation in this." His tone softened, but not enough to hide the steel beneath it. "They've found your address. They will come back, and they won't tap politely next time." She swallowed, her throat tight. "But this is my home." "It stopped being safe the moment that note touched your floor." She looked down at the worn carpet, the cracked window, the little crib she'd built with her own hands. Leaving felt like surrendering the last piece of her independence, the last bit of control she still had. But Matteo shifted in her arms, making a soft sound, and the realization struck her again. Her choices no longer belonged only to her. Adrian stepped closer, close enough that she felt the warmth radiating from him, close enough that she understood he wasn't asking. He was taking responsibility for her safety as if it had become his own burden. "I'm taking you somewhere they can't reach," he said. "Somewhere no one gets close unless they want to disappear." Her breath stilled. Your house?" He held her gaze without flinching. "My estate. It's the safest place in this city." Every instinct told her stepping into his world would change everything. But staying meant risking Matteo's life. And the memory of the note, "Found you," echoed through her mind like a threat carved into stone. She nodded, barely. "Okay." Relief flickered through his expression, subtle but unmistakable, as if he had been expecting more resistance. Without wasting a second, he motioned for her to gather a few essentials. Elena hurried around the small apartment, stuffing a bag with Matteo's clothes, diapers, formula, all the things a baby couldn't go without. She grabbed only one sweater for herself and a blanket her mother had made before she died. Adrian waited by the door, standing guard with a presence that made the room feel less terrifying. When she hesitated at the threshold, he touched the small of her back, not possessively, not forcefully, but grounding her. "You're safe with me," he said quietly. Those words shouldn't have comforted her, but they did. Outside, a sleek black SUV idled at the curb, its windows tinted, its engine a low, steady purr. Two men stood by it, scanning every shadow, every passing car. Elena clutched Matteo closer, feeling their eyes flick to her with respectful recognition before returning to the perimeter. Adrian opened the back door for her, guiding her inside with a gentleness that startled her. When he slid in beside her and closed the door, the city outside felt like another world. The car pulled away from her apartment, and Elena watched the building shrink through the rain-splattered window. It looked small, vulnerable, already claimed by danger. She wasn't sure if she would ever return. As they drove, Adrian's phone buzzed. He answered it with a tone so cold it made her shiver. "Report." A low voice on the other end murmured something she couldn't hear, but she saw Adrian's jaw tighten. His eyes darkened, focusing on something far beyond the confines of the SUV. "Keep searching," he said. "No one gets close to the building again. And find the source." He hung up. Silence settled again, thick and heavy. "Was it him?" Elena asked softly. "We're not certain yet." His voice was low, measured. "But someone knew where you were. Someone who shouldn't have." She stared at Matteo's tiny fingers curled around the edge of her sweater. "Why would they want us?" His gaze lingered on the baby, not with fear, but with a strange gravity that made her chest tighten. "Because of the choices someone else made," he said quietly. "And because your child may be tied to a secret others would kill for." Before she could ask what he meant, the car turned onto a long, private road lined with towering trees. The branches stretched overhead like dark archways, lit only by the soft glow of passing headlights. At the end of the winding drive stood a mansion unlike anything she had ever seen. Vast, elegant and cloaked in the kind of silence that only deep power could maintain. Iron gates opened slowly as the SUV approached, guarded by armed men who stepped aside with disciplined precision. When the car stopped, Adrian stepped out first, then turned to help her down. His hand remained at her back as he guided her across the rain-drenched stone path and into the house. The moment she crossed the threshold, warmth enveloped her. Golden lighting, polished wood floors, and the faint scent of cedar and something darker, something distinctly him. It wasn't just a house. It was a fortress. Inside, the halls were wide and dim, lit by soft sconces that cast long shadows against the walls. The silence wasn't empty. It felt inhabited by history, secrets, and the weight of lives lived in the margins of the world. Adrian led her through the entryway, past two guards who bowed their heads respectfully. He walked with the confidence of someone who protected more than he ruled. "You'll stay in the East Wing," he said. "It's close to my office. The security there is the strongest." She swallowed. "Why does it feel like you were prepared for this?" He paused in front of a door and turned to her. Something unspoken passed through his eyes, a truth he wasn't ready to give her yet. "Because I knew this day would come," he answered softly. Her breath caught. He opened the door to a large room, warm, spacious, with a crib already waiting in the corner, stocked with blankets and soft toys. It was all too perfect, too deliberate. She looked back at him with confusion and disbelief. "You prepared this?" He didn't hesitate. "For when you needed it." Her heart twisted painfully. No one had prepared anything for her in years. No one had thought of her needs, her fears, her safety. But Adrian had. She stepped inside, slowly, overwhelmed. Mateo stirred but didn't cry. Not even once. When she laid him gently in the crib, he sighed and settled peacefully, as though this place recognized him too. Adrian stood behind her, watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Elena," he said softly, "this house will keep you safe. I will keep you safe." She turned, meeting his gaze fully for the first time since crossing through his door. And she realized something she wasn't ready to name. Something that scared her more than the men outside hunting her. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He stepped closer, the room shrinking around them until only his voice and the steady beat of her heart existed. "Because danger is coming," he murmured, "and because, whether you believe it or not, you're no longer facing it alone." The shadows in the mansion shifted, settling around her like silent guardians. Safety, she realized, could feel just as frightening as danger, especially when it came wrapped in the form of a man like Adrian D'Angelo. The room felt strangely alive in the quiet that followed Adrian's words, as though the walls themselves exhaled after finally receiving the guest they had been waiting for. Elena stood with her palm resting on the edge of Mateo's crib, watching her son sleep peacefully in a place that didn't belong to them. The crib was soft, warm, perfect. Too perfect, too intentional. She felt the weight of it pressing on her, a silent question she wasn't yet brave enough to ask again. Adrian lingered near the doorway, not leaving, not intruding, simply existing in a way that made the air shift around him. Everything about him felt deliberate, the way he held himself, the depth of his breaths, the protective tension in his shoulders. He belonged in this house of shadows, in these high ceilings and quiet halls that remembered every footstep. Elena took a small breath, steadying the unease coiling inside her. "You said you knew this day would come," she murmured softly, turning to face him. "How? Why prepare a room for a stranger? For a baby who—" She hesitated, though she didn't know why. "Who means nothing to you?" His gaze flicked toward the crib, then back to her. "I never said he meant nothing," he replied, his voice low, almost pained in its restraint. A shiver danced up her spine at the quiet truth threaded through those words. He stepped farther into the room, the soft light catching the sharp angles of his face, revealing something hollow beneath the strength, something she hadn't noticed before, a kind of exhaustion that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from years of carrying burdens no one else could see. "You need rest," he said, but the softness in his tone hinted at something deeper than simple concern. She shook her head. "I can't sleep. Not after. Everything." Her fingers brushed Mateo's blanket. "Someone was in my hallway. Someone wants us." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I'll handle that." His certainty should have frightened her, but it didn't. Not because she trusted the world he came from. She didn't. But because she trusted the way he stood between her and danger without hesitation. "Elena," he said quietly, "I need you to understand something about this place. This estate is more secure than any police station, more guarded than any government building. No one gets in without my permission." "And if someone still tries?" she whispered. He looked at her with a calm that felt carved from iron. "They won't leave." There was no threat in his tone, only fact. Elena didn't know whether to fear it or feel relieved. Silence settled between them again, but a lighter kind this time, not heavy with dread. After several moments, she gathered her courage. "Adrian, why are you like this? Why prepare? Why protect us?" She paused, searching his unreadable expression. "Why me?" He inhaled slowly, as if choosing his words with care. "Because I know what it feels like," he said at last, "to be small and alone in a world built to crush you." She blinked, taken off guard. "You?" He nodded once, the slightest dip of his chin. A long time ago. She had heard whispers, rumors, fragments of stories about the D'Angelo brothers. Boys who grew up in violence, who learned too young how to survive. But she had never imagined the truth to touch him so personally. Adjusting his cuff, he walked toward the window, gazing into the estate grounds where faint lights glowed along the pathways. "I didn't have a childhood," he said, matter of fact but with a rough undertone. "Not one like your son deserves. Not one like you try to give him." His fingers touched the cold glass lightly, almost unconsciously. There was no warmth, only survival. Eleanor found herself drifting toward him, not out of curiosity, but out of something she couldn't name yet. Something that felt like understanding. "I was raised by men who believed mercy was a weakness," he continued. "Every lesson was taught with consequences. Every mistake was punished." His voice grew quieter, and when my brother died, whatever softness I had left disappeared. Her breath caught. "You had a brother?" He didn't answer immediately. The shadows around him deepened, as if absorbing the memory. "Luca," he said finally, the name carrying a weight that made something in his chest tighten visibly. "He was younger. Better. He believed in things I'd forgotten how to believe in. Things like forgiveness, kindness, a way out." Eleanor's heart ached at the way his voice softened when he said the name. "What happened?" Adrian didn't look at her, but she felt the shift in him, a tightening, a drawing inward. "Betrayal," he said. "Someone we trusted turned on us. Luca paid the price." She thought of the scar on his jaw, the steel in his eyes, the way he carried himself like a man built from the ashes of something once tender. Suddenly his protectiveness made sense, not because of who he was, but because of what he'd lost. "I'm sorry," she whispered, and she meant it more deeply than she expected. He turned to her then, and for a moment she saw the boy he must have once been, alone, frightened, desperate for safety that never came. It flickered across his expression like a ghost before disappearing behind the armor he wore so well. "You don't need to pity me," he said gently, though not unkindly. "Just understand why I cannot watch someone innocent suffer when I can stop it." Her breath trembled. "Is that why you're helping me?" "One reason," he murmured, his gaze drifting toward Matteo again. "There are others." Her pulse quickened at the implication, though she didn't dare push. Instead, she stepped closer, lowering her voice so as not to disturb her sleeping son. "Adrian," she said softly, "you act like you've known us longer than a day." His eyes darkened. "Longer than you think." The answer startled her. "What does that mean?" He hesitated. The first true hesitation she had ever seen from him. "There are things you're not ready to hear," he said. "Truths that would change how you look at everything, including me." A chill rippled through her. "Tell me." He shook his head. "Not yet." Her breath caught again, a mix of frustration and fear coiling in her chest. But before she could speak, Matteo shifted in the crib, letting out a small sigh that softened the tension between them. Adrian's gaze moved automatically to the child, the hardness in his eyes melting just enough for her to see something else. Something she hadn't noticed before. Longing. Quiet. Unspoken. Deep. Eleanor's heart pooled painfully. "You're good with him," she murmured. He swallowed, barely perceptible. "I never had anyone to be good to," he said. "Maybe that's why it comes easily now." She stepped closer, unable to help herself. "Adrian, you're not the monster people say you are." He looked at her, a faint, almost tragic smile touching the corner of his mouth. "Monsters aren't born, Elena. They're made." His voice lowered. "And I was made very young." A soft ache spread through her. She had walked into his home fearing the shadows, fearing the danger, fearing the man himself. But now she saw those shadows differently. Not as threats, but as memories he could never escape. "Even monsters can protect," she whispered. His breath hitched almost imperceptibly as though the words had struck a place he'd kept hidden for years. "I will protect you," he said quietly. "Both of you." Outside, the night deepened, wrapping the mansion in silence. Inside, the space between them narrowed. Not from danger this time, but from a quiet trust neither of them had expected. And in that dimly lit room, Eleanor realized something she hadn't wanted to admit. The most dangerous thing here was not the house, nor the shadows, nor the men who hunted her. It was the man standing before her, a man without a childhood, without softness, without peace, and the way her heart was beginning to move toward him anyway. Night settled over the estate like a velvet curtain, soft and heavy, muffling the outside world until it felt impossibly distant. Elena stepped out of Matteo's room after finally coaxing him into sleep, her body moving slowly, quietly, as though afraid to disturb the sense of fragile peace Adrian's mansion seemed to breathe into her. The corridor was dim, lit by gentle golden sconces that cast warm light across the polished floors. Her steps made no sound, and for a moment she felt like she was moving through a place that existed between realities. Neither fully safe nor fully dangerous, but suspended in its own silence. She paused near the window overlooking the courtyard. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind a mist that curled around the tall hedges and stone pathways like drifting breath. Water glistened on the leaves, shimmering beneath the soft glow of lanterns placed along the edges of the garden. It felt strangely magical, a world she didn't belong to but somehow had been allowed to enter. Her thoughts drifted back to Adrian, the shadows in his voice, the wounds he carried without speaking. She had seen a part of him tonight she never expected to see in a man with his reputation. A part untouched by power. a part no gun or title could protect. She wondered how many people had ever heard him speak about his brother. How many had seen the haunted softness that lived behind the iron of his gaze. Footsteps approached from somewhere behind her. Slow. Unhurried. Familiar. Elena. Adrian's voice murmured, deep and low, warming the air around her before she even turned. She looked over her shoulder. He stood a few feet away, dressed in a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled above his forearms, the top button undone. The tension in his posture softened from earlier. The dim light caught the angles of his face. Strong. Beautiful in a way that was far too dangerous for her to acknowledge. "I didn't wake you, did I?" she asked quietly. "No," he said, stepping closer. "I couldn't sleep." She wasn't surprised. Power like his came with its own kind of sleeplessness. A constant awareness. A constant alertness. As if the world never allowed him to fully rest. "I needed to breathe," she admitted softly. "Just for a moment." He glanced toward the courtyard. "You chose a good place for it." Silence enveloped them for a long moment. Not awkward, not tense, but slow and weighted with something neither of them dared name. The mist outside shifted gently, drifting across, the garden like a silvery veil. "You said there were things I'm not ready to know," she whispered, turning fully toward him. "But if you want me to trust you, you have to trust me too." His eyes met hers, and she felt the impact all the way through her chest. "I do trust you," he said, "more than I should." Her breath caught. "Then tell me something real." A faint smile tugged at his mouth. Not amused, but almost sad. "Things that are real in my world," he murmured, "have a habit of hurting people." "Maybe I'm stronger than you think." He studied her quietly. She felt him weighing her words, measuring them against the bruises life had carved into her heart. He took one slow step closer, closing the distance until only a breath separated them. She felt his warmth, his quiet intensity, the gravity that pulled her toward him, even when she wanted to resist it. "Tonight," he said softly, "I saw you walk into a house that terrifies most men in this city. And you did it with a baby in your arms and fear in your veins. That is strength." Her heart fluttered unevenly. He reached out, slowly, deliberately, and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch was so gentle she barely felt it, yet it sent warmth spiraling through her like a fragile spark catching fire. "You shouldn't be this close," she whispered, though her voice held no conviction. "I know," he murmured. "And yet—" His fingers lingered near her cheek, not quite touching it. She didn't lean in, but she didn't pull away. Something about the moment felt suspended, like if either of them breathed too loudly it would shatter. "Elena?" he whispered, her name suddenly sounding like something sacred. "You don't realize what you've walked into?" "Then help me understand." His hand dropped, but only so he could guide her to the window. Their reflections glimmered faintly in the glass, her small, uncertain silhouette beside his tall, guarded one. "Everything I am," he said quietly, "comes with danger. People close to me become targets." His voice darkened, almost breaking on the edges. "I won't let that happen to you." "But it already has," she whispered. "Someone followed me. Someone left that note. This started before I ever stepped into your house." He drew a long, steady breath, and she felt more than heard the conflict inside him. "That's why I brought you here," he said, "because I will not lose anyone else." The hurt he didn't speak lingered in the air between them, thick and quiet. Elena turned fully toward him, her fingertips brushing the fabric of his sleeve before she realized she'd reach for him. It felt instinctive. Not bold, not forward, just human. "I'm not asking you to save me," she said softly. I just don't want to face this alone. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, as though her words struck something raw inside him. When he opened them again, the darkness was still there, but something gentler glowed beneath it. You won't, he whispered. The simplicity of the promise made her breath tremble. She didn't expect the warmth that filled her chest, didn't ask for it, but it came anyway, slow and quiet and terrifyingly beautiful. They stood that way for a long time, close enough to feel each other's presence, far enough to pretend it meant nothing. Outside, the mist drifted like smoke, curling through the courtyard in silver ribbons. The night wrapped around them, soft but intense, like a secret whispered between souls. His voice broke the silence again, low and unguarded. If the world were different, if I were different. He didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning hung between them like a barely touched promise. Elena's fingers trembled slightly where they rested against his sleeve. Maybe, she whispered, you're not as different as you think. A long, slow exhale escaped him, almost a sigh, almost relief. He leaned down just enough that she felt his breath brush her forehead, the faintest whisper of contact that sent her heartbeat spiraling. Elena, he breathed, don't look at me like that. She didn't know how she was looking at him, only that it felt like something she couldn't hide. Like what? She whispered. Like I'm something you could trust, he murmured. You are? She said, barely audible. He drew back slightly, eyes searching hers with a depth that tightened her chest. Careful, he warned softly. There are lines I shouldn't cross. Then don't, she whispered. But neither of them stepped away. For a moment the world held still, still enough that if he had leaned in just an inch more, their lips would have touched, still enough that she feared and hoped for the same impossible thing. Then Matteo let out a soft cry from the bedroom, breaking the spell like a fragile thread snapping. Elena stepped back quickly, heartbeat racing. Adrian's breath stilled in his chest, and though he didn't move, the faint flicker of disappointment in his eyes mirrored a quiet ache inside her. You should check on him, he said gently. She nodded, suddenly painfully aware of how close they'd been. As she turned away, his voice reached her one last time, low and almost tender. Tonight, he murmured, felt like something I never thought I'd feel again. She paused at the doorway, her hand trembling on the frame. She didn't answer. She couldn't. But the truth lived fiercely in her chest. Tonight felt like a promise neither of them had dared to speak. Matteo had barely settled back into sleep by the time Elena eased herself out of the room again, her heartbeat still unsteady from the moment she and Adrian shared in the hallway. A moment that felt too close to something forbidden, too close to something she wasn't ready to name. She lingered near the doorway, staring into the dimness of the east wing corridor, letting the cool air brush her cheeks as if it could steady the heat still lingering under her skin. The estate was silent, that thick, cinematic quiet that made every breath, every thought feel heavier. She had no idea how much time had passed since she'd stepped away from Adrian, but the night had deepened, shadows stretching long across the walls like something waiting. She thought about going back to her room, slipping under the blankets and pretending her heart wasn't trembling from things she didn't have the courage to face yet. But as she turned, faint movement caught her attention. The soft, distant murmur of voices drifting from somewhere down the hall. One of them sounded like Adrian. The other was sharp, agitated, male. Something in the tone made her spine go rigid. She hesitated only a moment before moving quietly toward the sound. The closer she came, the clearer the voices grew. Not loud, but tense enough that every word seemed to vibrate against the walls. The door to Adrian's study was slightly ajar, warm lamplight spilling out in a narrow line. Eleanor stopped just short of the threshold, heart pounding, not intending to eavesdrop but unable to walk away when every instinct warned her something was wrong. "Are you absolutely certain?" Adrian's voice, low, deadly calm. "As certain as I can be," the other man replied. The same men from her building were spotted again, this time much closer. Eleanor's breath froze. Adrian's tone sharpened. "Closer where?" "Around the outer gate. Boss, they weren't scouting. They were waiting." Her stomach dropped. "And the message?" Adrian asked, colder now, an undercurrent of rage simmering beneath the surface. "We intercepted it, sent from a burner. Same handwriting, same intent." Eleanor's fingers curled around the edge of the wall. "What did it say?" Adrian demanded. A pause. Then, unwillingly, the man answered, "The child is the key." Eleanor felt the floor tilt beneath her. A wave of cold washed through her until her knees threatened to give out. The child. Mateo. Her baby. The key to what? To whom? Her pulse thundered painfully inside her ears. Adrian didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, it was a low, lethal whisper. "They know." "About her?" the man asked. "No," Adrian said. "About him." Eleanor pressed a hand to her mouth, breath stuttering. "Him. Mateo." Something inside her splintered. Fear, guilt, confusion tangling so tightly she couldn't separate them. "How?" she whispered under her breath. But she knew there was only one possible answer. Someone from her past. Someone she had trusted once. Someone tied to the world Adrian lived in. The memory hit her like a punch. The man she had once loved. The one who left without a backward glance. The one who had vanished long before Mateo was born. She hadn't spoken his name in months. Now it clawed its way back into her mind with icy clarity. Eric. The man who had lied, who had disappeared into criminal dealings she refused to understand. The man who had abandoned her without explanation. Or so she thought. Her breath trembled as she listened again. "We need to move her," the other man insisted. "Tonight?" "No." Adrian's voice cut through the air with cold finality. "If they're moving this fast, relocating her will expose her more. They're watching. They're waiting for a mistake." A quiet pause, heavy with meaning. "No one touches her or the child. No one." "Understood." The footsteps shifted. Too close. Eleanor backed away quickly, turning the corner just as the door opened. She pressed herself against the wall, forcing her breath silent, watching from the shadows as Adrian stepped out. His expression was carved from stone, unreadable, dangerous, controlled only by the thinnest thread of restraint. His shoulders were tense, jaw tight, eyes burning with a fury she hadn't seen before. A fury born not of anger, but of fear. Not for himself, for them. Eleanor. Her name left his mouth before he even looked up, as though he had felt her presence, as though he always did. She closed her eyes for a second, steadying herself before stepping out from the shadows. His gaze locked on her immediately. "How much did you hear?" She swallowed hard, voice small. "Enough." He exhaled, not irritated, not angry, but with the rare vulnerability of a man who hated exposing his darkness to someone innocent. He stepped toward her, his movements slow, deliberate, like he was approaching something fragile. "Elena," he said softly, "you weren't meant to hear that." "But I did," she whispered. He held her gaze, searching her face for fear he could soothe or panic he could intercept before it shattered her. She felt the moment he found it, the quiet tremble in her breaths, the unraveling fear she couldn't hide. "Tell me the truth," she said, forcing her voice not to break. "What do they want with my child?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, brushing his knuckles against her cheek with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Not here," he murmured. "Not like this." She stepped back, needing clarity more than comfort. "Adrian, please." His jaw clenched. "The men after you, after Mateo, they're not after money or revenge. They want something else." His voice dropped to a whisper. "Someone told them your child isn't just a child." Her blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then gave her the truth with devastating simplicity. "Your ex is alive." Her breath punched out of her. "No, Adrian, he left. He never wrote, never called, never." "He didn't leave," Adrian said gently. "He ran. From a deal gone wrong. From a betrayal deeper than anything you know. And he took something from a man I've spent years trying to bring down." Eleanor felt her heartbeat shatter. "And you think... Mateo..." Adrian stepped closer, his voice nearly breaking. "Your son may carry something valuable to the men looking for him. Something they believe gives them power." His eyes softened. "Something they will kill to obtain." Eleanor's body trembled violently, not from fear alone, but from a dawning horror that made breathing feel impossible. She backed into the wall, hands shaking as she whispered, "No, no, this can't be happening." Adrian reached for her instinctively, but stopped just short of touching her, his restraint trembling between them. "Elena," he said softly, urgently, "look at me." She forced her gaze upward. His expression was raw, not with anger, but with a fierce, aching protectiveness. "I will not let them touch you," he said. "I will not let them near him. I swear to you." A tear slipped down her cheek, falling warm against her skin. She didn't brush it away. "And if they come?" she whispered. Adrian's voice dropped to a vow that cut through the dark. "Then they'll learn what happens when the past comes for what I protect." Before she could speak, alarms erupted faintly across the estate, distant, sharp, urgent. Adrian's head snapped up. "They're here!" Eleanor's heart stopped, and the night, once velvet and soft, turned into a storm ready to swallow them whole. The alarms cut through the mansion like a razor, shrill and urgent, turning the quiet night into a battlefield, before Eleanor could even draw a full breath. Adrian reacted instantly, his hand closing around her wrist, not painfully, but firmly, decisively, pulling her toward him as armed guards rushed down the corridor. Red emergency lights flickered to life, staining the walls with pulses of crimson. Somewhere down the hall, a heavy door slammed, followed by orders barked in rapid Italian. Eleanor's heartbeat matched the alarm, fast and panicked. Her world had already been tilting, now it lurched violently. "Stay behind me," Adrian commanded, his voice calm in a way that terrified her more than the chaos around them. Calm meant he was used to this. Calm meant danger didn't surprise him. Calm meant the storm outside had teeth. "Mateo," she gasped. "He's safe," Adrian said. "My men are already at his door." She didn't know how he knew that, but the certainty in his voice kept her from collapsing. He led her swiftly through a side corridor, away from the commotion. 2 guards joined them, weapons drawn, movement sharp and deadly. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and adrenaline. Elena tried to steady her breathing, but fear clawed at her chest, rising, suffocating. She had run from trouble her entire life, but never had it chased her with such precision, such intent. They reached Mateo's room within seconds. Just as Adrian said, 2 guards stood on either side of the door, tense and alert. One of them nodded to him. "Perimeter's secure, sir. They're testing the outer defenses." "Trying to scare us," the other muttered. Adrian's jaw tightened. They succeeded. For the last time. He opened the door for her, gesture sharp with urgency. Eleanor hurried inside, rushing to Mateo's crib. gathering him into her arms as if someone might rip him away if she hesitated. He stirred, then settled instantly when she whispered his name. Adrian stepped in behind her, flicking a switch that sealed the room with a quiet mechanical hiss. The walls thickened, reinforced panels sliding into place. "What's happening?" she whispered, turning toward him, her breath unsteady. "Adrian, please, just tell me." "They're testing my security," he replied. "Looking for weaknesses. Tonight wasn't an attack. It was a warning." She stared at him, shaken. "Warning us of what?" His eyes met hers, dark, sharp, burning with something deeper than fury. "That they're not giving up. That they want the child. That they know who you are, and who he might be." A tremor ran through her arms, and she tightened her hold on Matteo. She wanted to deny it, to insist it was a mistake, that no one could possibly want her child for anything but cruelty. But deep down, she already knew the truth. She had known it since the moment Adrian uttered the name of her past, Eric, and everything inside her cracked. She swallowed, voice trembling as she spoke. "Adrian, I need to tell you something." He turned fully toward her, shoulders stiffening, senses sharpening like a predator bracing for impact. "What is it?" She looked down at Matteo, then back at Adrian, guilt twisting painfully inside her. "I didn't lie to you. Not exactly. But I didn't tell you everything. I didn't know how." His gaze sharpened. "Say it." Elena drew a slow, agonizing breath. "Eric doesn't know about Matteo?" For a moment, Adrian didn't react. He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. Silence thickened around them until Elena thought it might split her open. "He doesn't know," Adrian repeated quietly, dangerously. "No," she whispered. "He left before I found out I was pregnant. I told myself I'd never give him the chance to hurt us. I didn't want him in my child's life, not his world, not his choices." Adrian's jaw clenched so hard she thought it might crack. "You kept his child from him." "It wasn't his choice," she whispered. "It was mine. And now it's killing you," Adrian said, voice low, controlled, vibrating with restrained anger. Not at her, she realized, but at the situation, at the man who had caused it. "Elena, why didn't you tell him? Why didn't you tell me?" Tears pricked at her eyes, blurring her vision. "Because I was ashamed. Because I was scared. Because I didn't want to admit that I had loved someone who could walk away so easily. And when I found out who he really was, what he was involved in, I felt sick. I didn't want Matteo tied to that. I didn't want him tied to anything dark." Adrian stepped closer, slowly, as though approaching someone who had been wounded too many times. "You weren't wrong," he murmured, "but hiding the truth doesn't erase it." Her breath trembled. "I know, and I never meant to pull you into this. I just wanted to survive." At that, Adrian's expression changed. The anger softened, giving way to something far more painful. Understanding. He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek with the gentlest touch she had ever known from him. "You didn't pull me into this," he said softly. "I stepped into it myself." She shook her head, tears sliding down her face. "I kept secrets. I should have told you everything from the beginning." "You told me what mattered," he murmured. "And the rest, you told me now. That's enough." She looked up at him, heart twisting painfully. "Adrian, if he doesn't know about Matteo, then why are they after us? What do they want?" His eyes darkened. "Because Eric didn't tell you everything either. He stole something from a powerful man. Something worth killing for. Something they believe your child inherited." "What?" she whispered. "What could a baby possibly have?" Adrian shook his head. "Until I know more, I won't guess. But whatever it is, they're willing to bleed for it." Elena felt her knees weaken. She sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching Matteo close as fear coiled tighter around her ribs. Adrian knelt in front of her, his voice steady, grounding. "You listened to me," he said. "You didn't lie. You protected your child, and you're still doing it. But now," his hand brushed hers, "now you're not doing it alone." Her breath faltered. "I never wanted this to become your burden." He met her gaze with a depth that made her heart stumble. "You are not a burden," he said. "Neither is he." Silence expanded between them, soft, fragile, electric. Then his phone buzzed sharply. Adrian stood, answering it with a clipped tone. "Report!" A voice murmured something frantic on the other end. Adrian's expression darkened. "When?" he asked, each word precise. A beat of silence. Then Adrian spoke words that froze Elena's blood. "Find him. Now." He hung up slowly. Elena swallowed hard. "Adrian, what happened?" He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something like dread flicker in his eyes. "Elena," he said quietly, "Eric isn't running anymore." Her heart stopped. "He's coming for you." The room felt smaller after Adrian's words. The air pressed tighter, heavier, as if the walls themselves leaned in to swallow the truth he'd just spoken. Eric was coming. The man who abandoned her. The man who lied. The man she had once trusted with her whole heart, now a shadow stepping back into her life with intentions she could no longer predict. Elena clutched Matteo closer, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against her chest, grounding her even as panic coiled in her stomach like smoke. Adrian watched her carefully, his expression unreadable, his stance tense as though preparing to catch her if she collapsed. "When?" she whispered. Her voice barely held together. "Soon," Adrian replied, tone clipped. "My men are tracking him now." "How did he even find us?" Her words cracked. "How could he know where I am?" "He doesn't," Adrian said softly. "Not yet. But he knows enough to start moving." She tried to breathe, but fear pressed against her ribs like something sharp. She lowered her gaze to the floor, unable to meet Adrian's eyes. Shame rose again, bitter and familiar, reminding her of all the choices she made when she was younger, naive, foolish in love. Choices that now returned with teeth. Adrian took a step toward her, but she moved back instinctively. Not because she feared him, but because she feared leaning on him too much. She feared how easily she could fall apart in his presence. His hand, half lifted, dropped to his side when she stepped away. Something inside him flickered. A fracture of vulnerability she wasn't ready to see. "Elena," he said gently, "he will not get to you. I will not let him." She forced herself to look up at him, and the moment their eyes met, the weight of everything between them pressed deeper. "This isn't your fight," she whispered. "It shouldn't be." "It became mine," he murmured, "the moment you opened your door." Her chest tightened. The sincerity in his voice hit too deeply, too sweetly, too dangerously. She didn't deserve the kind of loyalty, not from him, not from anyone. She broke eye contact first. "I should have told him," she said quietly. "About Matteo." Adrian's jaw tightened. "You made the only choice that protected your child." "But now it's worse," she murmured. "If Eric thinks Matteo has something he wants, he won't stop." "No," Adrian agreed softly. "He won't?" The honesty stung, even though she already knew it. She moved to the crib and gently laid Matteo down, brushing her fingers through his soft hair. Watching him sleep made her heart break with fear and love all at once. Behind her, Adrian took a slow breath, not loud, but deep enough that she felt the shift in the room. "You and your son will be protected," he said, "no matter what it takes." His tone was steady, but something else hovered beneath it. Something she didn't notice at first. something she felt only when silence stretched between them. Heavier with meaning. Distance. A slow, aching distance. She turned toward him, and that's when she saw it fully. A new wall between them, invisible, but unmistakable. A boundary he had drawn the moment Eric's name re-entered the room. The moment her past reached into their almost moment. Adrian stepped back, physically, as if pushing himself into safer territory, as if reminding himself of lines he wasn't meant to cross. "Elena," he said quietly, "you should rest. Tomorrow will be difficult." She blinked, the shift cutting deeper than she expected. Are you leaving?" "I'll station guards outside your door," he replied, voice tightening in a way she didn't understand. "I'll be nearby." Nearby, but not here, not close. She swallowed. "Did I do something wrong?" His eyes flicked to her, dark, conflicted, haunted. "No." "Then why are you—" Her voice caught. "Why are you pulling away?" He held still for a long moment, too still, as though he feared any movement might reveal too much. "Elena," he said lowly, "your past has returned. Your child may be in danger because of a man you once loved. And you are in my home, under my protection. That means every decision I make now must be without emotion." Emotion. The word pierced her. "You think I'm a distraction?" she whispered. Adrian's breath slipped out slowly, almost shakily, though he hid it well. "No, you're more than that. And that's the problem." Her chest tightened painfully. She had felt the shift between them, the warmth, the closeness, the near kiss that almost happened. She had allowed herself to believe that maybe, in another world, she could reach for something like that. Something like him. But now reality returned with claws. "I can't lose focus," he continued. "Not when the threat is this close. Not when you and your son depend on me staying sharp." She understood. She did. But understanding didn't stop the ache blooming inside her chest. "You think being close to me will make you weak?" she whispered. His silence was answer enough. Elena stepped back, folding her arms as if to protect herself from a cold that hadn't been there before. "I didn't ask you to care," she said softly. "I didn't ask for any of this." "No," Adrian replied, "but I do care, too much. And that makes it dangerous." The confession hit her breath first, then her heart. But before she could respond, he moved toward the door. "We'll keep the distance for now," he murmured, "until the threat is gone." Her throat tightened. "And after?" He paused, his hand on the doorframe, shoulders stiffening. For a moment she thought he might turn back. She hoped he would. But instead, he whispered with the devastating restraint, "There may not be an after." Her breath broke. "Adrian!" He stepped out before she could finish, before the fear in her voice could pull him back. The door closed gently behind him, the soft click echoing in the quiet room like the ending of something that had barely begun. Elena stood frozen, her fingers trembling, eyes burning as she stared at the door he'd disappeared through. The distance he carried, with him seeped into the room, cold and hollow, filling every corner like the loneliness she thought she'd left behind. She lowered herself to the floor beside Mateo's crib, hugging her knees to her chest. Adrian was right. The threat had grown closer. And he needed clarity, focus, discipline. But knowing that didn't stop the ache. Didn't stop her from wishing he'd stayed. Didn't stop the echo of his absence from filling the room. She didn't sob, didn't collapse. Instead, she sat in silence, letting the heartbreak settle into her bones, quiet, heavy, inevitable. The mansion felt larger now, colder, a labyrinth of shadows stretching between her and the man who had promised to protect her, but not to stay close. And somewhere in the echo of the night, she realized something she wasn't ready to admit. Distance could hurt more than danger. The night after Adrian pulled away felt unbearably long. Eleanor barely slept, drifting in and out of shallow dreams where shadows chased her through endless hallways. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's expression from earlier. Restrained, conflicted, withdrawing, not because he didn't care, but because he cared too much. That truth hurt more sharply than rejection ever could. When dawn finally crept across the mansion in pale gold streaks, it brought no warmth, only quiet, only distance. She fed Matteo, changed him, rocked him gently, all the while feeling the empty echo of Adrian not being there. His absence pressed against her ribs like an ache she didn't understand how to carry. And though she tried to tell herself it didn't matter, that she shouldn't expect kindness from a man whose life was forged in blood and smoke, her heart betrayed her with every thud. Around noon, she ventured out of her room. The east wing felt different. Softer yesterday, colder today. The guards stationed outside bowed respectfully, but the moment she stepped past them, the mansion stretched before her like a labyrinth she no longer knew how to navigate. She wandered through the corridors, searching for something she couldn't name, until she reached the great foyer. A handful of guards passed through with tension in their shoulders. Voices murmured from the study doors, low, male, urgent. One of them was Adrian's. Even from across the hall, she recognized it immediately. He sounded tired, harder than usual, empty in a way that made her stomach twist. She shouldn't disturb him. She shouldn't want to. But her feet moved before she decided anything at all. She walked closer, just close enough to hear the tail end of a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Keep her in the east wing, at least until Eric surfaces. She's uneasy, sir, another man said. She feels like a prisoner. She's not a prisoner, Adrian replied, sharp but quiet. She's protected. Protected can feel the same as trapped, the man said carefully. Adrian paused. The silence cracked with meaning. She can leave whenever she chooses. But if she chooses wrong? The man asked. Another silence, longer this time. He exhaled slowly. Then I'll still protect them from a distance, even if she hates me for it. Hates. The word struck her harder than she expected. She stepped away before he or the guards noticed she had been listening, retreating down the hall with her pulse fluttering in her throat. Her mind spun. He was pulling away not because he didn't want her near, but because he feared his presence would put her in more danger. And yet, he was still planning to protect her, even if she walked out of his life, even if she blamed him for everything. The selflessness of it tore at her in a way she wasn't prepared for. Back in her room, she sat on the edge of the bed, watching Matteo sleep. The helplessness built inside her until she couldn't breathe. She felt safe here, but suffocated by the fear that she didn't belong. Protected, yet painfully aware of the distance Adrian had placed like a wall between them. She knew he was right. He needed clarity, composure, a clear path to keep them alive. But her heart ached anyway. She wasn't sure how long she sat there before a soft knock sounded on her door. She opened it to find a woman, maybe in her 50s, warm brown eyes, gentle smile. Miss Eleanor, she said kindly, I'm Marla. I've been asked to check on you. Eleanor shook her head. I'm fine. I just need some air. Marla hesitated. The gardens are quiet this time of day. You'll be safe there. Safe. The word again. Eleanor thanked her, stepping out with Matteo cradled against her chest. She walked through wide glass doors leading into the inner garden, a stunning courtyard with stone paths, soft moss, climbing roses, and a fountain whispering gently at its center. Sunlight kissed the water, scattering reflections like tiny stars. She sat on a bench beneath a willow tree and let the quiet settle around her. The wind brushed her face, cool and soft. Here, away from the alarms and the shadows and the tension between her and Adrian, she finally felt like she could breathe again. Matteo cooed softly, reaching for her necklace. She smiled weakly and kissed his forehead. "We should leave," she whispered to him. "This isn't our world. We don't belong here." The truth of it hurt, but staying meant danger would keep creeping closer. And she couldn't bear the thought of Matteo growing up surrounded by violence, guarded hallways, men with weapons. She loved Adrian's protection, his intensity, his steadiness, the way he had held their safety like something sacred. But she could not let her child live inside someone else's war. The decision formed slowly, painfully, settling in her heart like a stone. She would leave. Not because she didn't trust Adrian, but because she did. So much that she couldn't let him carry her burden any longer. She kissed Matteo's cheek again. "We will be okay," she whispered, though her voice wavered. "I'll find somewhere safe, somewhere quiet, somewhere we can start over." She stood from the bench, tightening the blanket around her son. She walked back toward the mansion with purpose, her heart breaking with every step. She packed only essentials, a few clothes, Matteo's things, the blanket her mother made, her documents. The small bag looked pitiful for the size of the decision she was making. Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them away. If she cried, she wouldn't be able to leave. She opened the door quietly, careful not to alert the guards stationed nearby, but they noticed anyway. "Miss Eleanor," one of them called gently. "Do you need something?" She hesitated, then forced herself to keep walking. "I'm just stepping out," she murmured, "for air." The guards exchanged a glance, but didn't question her. The mansion was a maze of security. No one imagined she'd willingly walk away from the safest place she'd ever been. Elena slipped through the side exit Marla showed her earlier. The cool afternoon air hit her like a truth she couldn't ignore. She tightened her grip on Matteo and stepped farther from the house. Each step hurt. Each step felt wrong. But she kept walking. She made it past the hedges, past the stone path, past the manicured trees. She reached the edge of the estate, the boundary where the wrought iron fence marked the line between Adrian's world and hers, and she stopped. A lump swelled in her throat. She whispered a trembling apology into the wind, hoping somewhere, somehow, Adrian would feel it. Then she stepped through the open gate. Back inside, a camera light blinked red. In the security control room, an alert flashed. And in his office across the mansion, Adrian's phone buzzed with one message from his guard. "Sir, she's gone." Adrian stood up so fast his chair fell backward. His heart stopped for one shattering moment. Elena had walked away, and she had taken his whole world with her. Adrian didn't remember moving, only the crashing silence inside him when the guard's message appeared. 1 second he was staring at the blinking notification on his phone, and the next he was storming through the mansion, every step echoing with a rising fury he could barely contain. Not at her. Never at her. But at himself, for letting the distance grow, for letting her slip away in the one moment he believed he was protecting her by stepping back. His heart pounded in a way he didn't recognize, too raw, too human, too exposed. His guards followed, anxious, out of breath. "She couldn't have gone far, sir," one said. But he didn't trust distance anymore, not when danger had sharpened its teeth, not when Eric was out there searching. Eleanor had walked out thinking she was doing the noble thing. He knew that. He understood her heart better than she realized. She wasn't running from him. She was trying to save him from becoming entangled in her ruin. She believed she was making it easier for him. She didn't know she was tearing him apart. Adrian reached the garden door she'd exited, pushing it open so hard the hinges groaned. Cold air slapped him in the face. but nothing cut through the ice settling inside his chest. The garden looked impossibly still, peaceful in a cruel, mocking way. The trees whispered softly in the afternoon breeze, their branches swaying gently above the empty pathway where she had walked just minutes before. He stepped out, scanning the grounds with eyes honed by years of tracking threats. Silence settled in his bones, a silence that tasted like loss. The gate stood open, a quiet invitation to the outside world. The sight of it sent a sharp, unwelcome jolt through him. He hated the panic that followed. Panic was unfamiliar. Panic was weakness. But panic didn't care about his reputation. Not when it came to her. He stepped through the gate slowly, noticing the imprint of her footsteps in the soft earth, the small drag where her shoe had caught on a stone, the way she had paused for a breath. He imagined her standing there with Matteo in her arms, torn between fear and determination. "Elena," he whispered into the empty air, a single word that felt like a wound. He could no longer hear the alarms in his mind, no longer hear the distant radios of his men. All he heard was silence, the silence she left behind, the silence she walked into, the silence that now stretched between them like a chasm. He tracked her as far as he could, past the gate, down the narrow path lined with cypress trees, up to the small rise overlooking the outer road where a security car had spotted her silhouette before she vanished beyond the camera's reach. His men fanned out like shadows, covering ground quickly. "We'll find her," a guard said. "She can't be far." But far meant nothing when the world outside his estate was already searching for her. And he felt the pressure of the truth like a blade pressed against his spine. "Double the patrols," he ordered. "Expand the perimeter. I want eyes on every exit within 5 miles. "Yes, sir." He turned toward the open gate again, hands curling into fists at his sides. He imagined her walking along the empty back road, trying to be brave, carrying a baby she shouldn't have to protect alone. He imagined the fear tightening her shoulders every time she heard a sound behind her. He imagined her telling herself she was doing the right thing, that she was sparing him. But she didn't understand. She didn't understand that she had already carved a place inside him, quiet, but irreversible. She didn't understand that walking away didn't protect him. It destroyed him. He forced himself to breathe, slowly. He couldn't fall apart. Not now. Not when she needed him most. He moved back inside the mansion, returning to the control room with quick, sharp steps. His men snapped to attention. "Sir, we've alerted every checkpoint. No sign yet." "Keep looking." Adrian stepped back from the screens, jaw tight, breathing shallow but steady. He stared at the monitors tracking the surrounding forests and roads, searching for any sign of her small figure. Nothing. Only trees. Only wind. Only silence. The quiet felt like punishment. Hours passed. The sun sank slowly. Shadows stretched long across the estate, reaching into corners like cold fingers. His men checked every route, every camera, every blind spot. He stood still through it all, unmoving, unblinking, unreadable, but inside, the silence roared. It was a silence he recognized. The same silence he felt the night his brother died. The same silence that followed loss, deep and merciless. He didn't want to feel that silence again. Not because of her. Not because of the child who had stopped crying the moment he whispered to him. Inside her empty room, Elena folded Matteo's blanket around him, her breath trembling as she walked along the edge of the forest path. She thought the distance would make things easier. That leaving would remove the burden from his shoulders. That this was the right thing, the responsible thing, the only thing. But with every step, the ache grew. She looked over her shoulder again and again, expecting him to appear, even though she had left on purpose. "He needs distance," she whispered to herself. He needs clarity. But she felt each step as if she were pulling her heart out thread by thread. And Matteo fussed softly in her arms, as though sensing the breaking inside her. She kept walking, and he kept searching. When night finally fell, Adrian was still standing in the control room, gripping the back of a chair too tightly. One of his guards returned, hesitant. "Sir, all cameras confirm she never reached the main road." Adrian's head lifted slowly. Meaning what? She must have taken the forest route. A route without cameras, a route that led deep into the woods, a route vulnerable to anyone tracking her. Adrian's chest tightened painfully. His voice dropped into something dark and quiet. "Prepare the dogs, torches, every available man." "Sir?" "Now." He stepped toward the door, his heartbeat steady, deadly determined. He would search the entire night. He would tear the forest apart. He would not let silence steal her. "Elena," he whispered again into the dark, "don't disappear." Back in the forest, miles from the estate, Elena sat on a cold fallen log, holding Matteo close, rocking him gently as tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She tried to be strong, but the silence around her, thick, endless, lonely, was breaking her piece by piece. She didn't know that Adrian was whispering the same silence into the night. Didn't know he was already out searching. Didn't know the distance between them wasn't hate. It was fear. A fear neither of them could outrun. And somewhere between the trees and the empty roads, two hearts ached for each other in the same quiet, devastating way. The silence tonight would break them both. Night pressed heavily over the forest, a thick darkness broken only by the pale glow of moonlight flickering between branches. Elena sat on the fallen log, cradling Matteo close, her breath trembling in the cold air. Every rustle, every distant snap of twigs, every sigh of wind made her heart jolt. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, trying to steady herself, but fear had rooted deep inside her. She had thought she was doing the right thing by leaving, keeping Adrian out of danger, keeping herself from becoming a burden. But now, surrounded by shadows that shifted too easily into silhouettes of threat, she finally understood the truth. She had walked into danger alone. Matteo stirred restlessly in her arms, his tiny fingers curling into the fabric of her sweater. He let out a soft, breathy cry, not the sharp wail he used to give, not the desperate sound that once shook her at midnight, but a weaker, trembling sound that made her chest tighten. "It's okay," she whispered, rocking him gently. "We'll find somewhere warm soon, I promise." But even as she said it, doubt gnawed at her. She had no plan, no shelter, no protection. Only distance. Distance she had created, distance that hurt more than the cold ever could. Matteo whimpered again, a small sound that drifted into the air like a plea. "Why won't you settle?" she murmured, kissing his forehead. "Why do you cry like this?" Back when they lived alone, his cries were constant, sharp, unexplainable, endless. Only Adrian's presence ever calmed him. She had thought it was coincidence, instinct, some strange comfort Matteo found in the deep steadiness of Adrian's voice. But now, far from safety, far from warmth, far from the man who had whispered, "Come to me," like a vow that touched something in both of them. She felt it again, a strange energy inside her child's trembling, like his body was reacting to something unseen. "Matteo," she whispered, fear creeping back. "Baby, what's wrong?" He cried harder, soft but strained, as though something inside him hurt. Her panic rose. Was he cold? Sick? Hungry? Overwhelmed? She rocked him, humming softly, but the cries didn't ease. Her hands shook. In the quiet of the forest, the sound of his crying felt too loud, too exposed, too vulnerable. She clutched him closer, looking around desperately. Where could she go? How far had she wandered? How long had she been walking? She pressed her forehead to Mateo's, shivering in the cold. Please stop. Please, baby. Please. The wind picked up, whispering through the trees. The night felt sharper now, like something in the air had shifted. Far away, at the edge of the forest, Adrian moved like a shadow, torch in hand, fury and fear burning through him in equal measure. His men spread out through the darkness, calling her name, searching the ground for tracks. He ignored the ache in his chest, ignored the cold, ignored the exhaustion. He had never searched for anyone with this kind of desperation. Elena, he called, voice echoing beyond the trees. Eleanor, answer me. The forest swallowed his voice whole. He listened, not for movement, not for footsteps, but for the faintest sound of a baby crying. But the woods answered with silence, terrifying silence, until, somewhere deeper in the trees, a faint, trembling sound flickered through the air. A cry. Adrian's heart slammed into his ribs. Here, he barked to his men, sprinting forward. I heard something. This way. Branches whipped past his face as he ran, light slicing through the darkness ahead of him. His breaths came deep and sharp, but he didn't slow. He couldn't. Not when her voice still echoed in his mind, not when the shape of her silhouette haunted the shadows. Elena, he shouted again, please. But the next cry wasn't hers. It was Mateo's. The moment the sound reached Elena, she froze. The cries were weak, not painful, but desperate, urgent in a way that twisted something deep in her chest. Mateo, please, she whispered, rocking him faster. Tell me what hurts. She pressed her ear to his chest, listening. His heartbeat was fast, too fast, his breathing uneven. A cold rush of fear spiraled through her. Oh God, she whispered. Baby, please. His cry sharpened suddenly, thin and piercing. Adrian could always calm you, she whispered brokenly. Why? What is this? Why does he? Her breath caught mid-sentence. The truth struck her like a bolt through her spine. Mateo only cried like this when something was wrong. And he only stopped when Adrian was near. Not because Adrian was comforting, but because something inside Mateo reacted to him. Something biological. Something instinctive. Something genetic. The realization hit her so hard she nearly dropped to her knees. Your father? She whispered. Not Eric. Not the man who left. Not the man she thought she had loved. Everything. The timing, the crying, Mateo's strange calm around Adrian. It all pointed to a truth she had buried under her assumptions. Adrian, she whispered, trembling. A crack of branches snapped nearby. She stiffened. Movement approached, heavy, fast, purposeful. Who's there? She breathed, clutching Mateo tighter. Another crack. Closer. Eleanor. Adrian's voice crashed through the dark like thunder. Her knees buckled. She turned just as he burst through the trees, breath heavy, eyes wild, fear carved into every line of his expression. He froze when he saw her. She stood trembling, clutching Mateo so tightly she could barely breathe. Elena? He said again, softer now, like her name was a prayer he wasn't ready to stop saying. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Only tears. Adrian took one slow step toward her, his voice rough with emotion. Give him to me? She hesitated, not out of fear, but because of the truth that throbbed beneath her skin, the truth she wasn't ready to speak. But Mateo cried louder, and she couldn't bear it. She placed the child gently into Adrian's arms. The moment he touched the baby, Mateo went silent. Utterly, impossibly silent. Elena let out a trembling sob. Adrian looked down at the baby in shock, then up at her with something like disbelief. "Elena," he whispered, voice breaking. "Why? Why does he always stop when I hold him?" She shook her head slowly, tears spilling. "Because he knows you." His breath caught. "Because," she swallowed hard, "because his body remembers you." A single heartbeat passed, then another. Adrian's eyes widened, a truth dawning inside them he never expected to face. "Elena," he whispered again, voice shaking. "What are you saying?" Her lips parted, but before she could speak, a branch snapped violently behind them. Deeper in the forest, heavier, sharper. Both heads jerked toward the sound. Adrian's voice dropped into lethal silence. "We're not alone." Matteo whimpered once, and then silence swallowed the night whole. The forest seemed to stop breathing. Even the wind stilled, as if the night itself leaned in to listen. Adrian shifted Matteo closer to his chest, the baby already settling into an impossible calm against him. Elena stood frozen a few feet away, her breath trembling, her hands still lifted slightly as though reaching for a truth she had finally spoken out loud. Or almost spoken. She could see the question burning in Adrian's eyes, an unspoken truth flickering like fire behind his grief-sharpened gaze. But the snap of another branch cut through the moment, louder, deliberate. Someone was out there. Someone close. Adrian's body moved before his mind did. Instinct, training, reflex. He stepped in front of Elena without hesitation, shielding both her and the child with the breadth of his frame. His hand reached into his coat, curling around the cold steel of his gun. His voice dropped to a whisper, calm but razor-sharp. "Stay behind me." Elena nodded, fear tightening her chest, but trust anchoring her feet to the ground. She didn't think. She simply moved closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating from him, close enough that her shoulder brushed his back. The contact steadied her. Another movement, this time to the left. Heavy, slow. Adrian turned his head slightly, tracking the sound. "I need you to stay quiet," he murmured, almost too softly for her to hear. "No matter what happens." Elena swallowed, eyes burning. "Adrian." "Shh." His voice softened. "Don't be afraid." But she was. Not of him, of losing him. Behind a thick cluster of trees, a shadow shifted, too tall to be an animal, too slow to be one of Adrian's men. The figure stepped closer, the faint gleam of metal catching the moonlight. Eleanor's breath hitched. She gripped the back of Adrian's coat, fingers trembling, every instinct screaming to run. But where? Into darkness? Into danger? Adrian adjusted Matteo, keeping him tucked securely in one arm, while his other hand raised the gun. He prepared to fire if necessary, prepared to kill if he had to. The protector in him rose with blistering clarity, a storm of deadly precision and quiet fear. "Elena," he whispered, "if I tell you to run, you run." "And leave you," she breathed, his jaw tensed. "To keep him safe," he said. "I would give everything." The shadow moved again, then broke into a run. Adrian pushed Elena back behind a tree, stepping forward to aim. But before he could fire, a voice ripped through the darkness, hoarse, desperate, shaking with anger and something uglier. "Elena!" Her blood froze. She hadn't heard that voice in almost a year, not since the man she once loved walked away without a backward glance. Eric. She couldn't see his face, only the silhouette stumbling through the trees, his steps uneven, his breath ragged. He wasn't here for love, not for guilt, not for her, only the baby. "Elena," he gasped again, now close enough for moonlight to reveal his ruined expression. Fear, greed, desperation twisting his features into something barely human. "Give him to me." Adrian's gun raised instantly. "One more step," he growled, "and I put you in the ground." Eric's eyes widened at the sight of him, recognition mingling with terror. "D'Angelo," he spat. "I knew it. I knew you'd sink your teeth into her life, too." Adrian didn't flinch. "You left her to drown," he said coldly. "I pulled her out." Eric's gaze darted to Matteo in Adrian's arms, then back to Elena, wild, frantic. "Elena, listen to me," he pleaded. "The baby, he has something they want, something he shouldn't have." She stepped back, shaking. "You need to stay away." "No," Eric said, stepping closer. "You don't understand. He isn't safe with him." Adrian's eyes darkened. "Do you think anything about you feels safe?" "Elena," Eric barked, ignoring him. "Give me the baby. I'll fix this. I'll fix everything." Adrian raised his gun a fraction higher. "You're not touching him?" "Elena." Eric lunged. Elena screamed. Adrian moved so fast the world blurred. He spun, placing his body between Eric and the baby, absorbing the momentum of the attack. They crashed against a tree, Eric swinging wildly, fueled by panic more than skill. Adrian countered with lethal control, striking his wrist, sending the glinting blade Eric had hidden flying into the dirt. "Stay back!" Adrian roared to Elena. Matteo whimpered in his arms, sensing the tension, but not breaking into the desperate cries that once tortured him. Adrian angled himself protectively, every strike calculated, every movement a vow carved into violence. Eric stumbled back, panting. "He's mine!" Adrian's expression cracked, something raw flickering under the cold fury. "He's not," he said quietly. "And he never was." Eric froze. Elena's breath caught. The forest held its breath. "What? What are you saying?" Eric rasped, chest heaving. Adrian stepped forward, eyes locked on him. "The child isn't yours." Eric shook his head violently. No, Elena was with me. She was," Adrian said. "But the timing was wrong. And the doctors we took him to last week, the results came today." Elena's knees nearly buckled. You took him for testing?" she whispered. Adrian didn't look away from Eric. His voice softened only for her. "To keep him safe. To know what was inside him that these people wanted." "And?" she breathed. Adrian turned fully toward her, and in his eyes she saw something she wasn't prepared to face, something that shook her down to her soul. "Elena," he said softly, "Matteo shares my markers, my blood, my traits." Her lips parted. "He's mine." The forest spun. "No," Eric choked. "No, she never told me. She didn't know," Adrian said, voice steady, quiet, almost reverent. "Neither did I." Elena's tears spilled. "Adrian!" Eric let out a broken, furious cry and charged again, but Adrian moved with a lethal, protective fury Elena had never seen before. He pinned Eric to the ground, locking him down in one swift motion. "You don't touch what's mine," Adrian whispered, each word trembling with emotion he never allowed himself to feel. Eric thrashed. I'll take him. Give him." "You'll get nothing," Adrian growled. Eric screamed, a sound of pure rage, until a gun clicked behind them. Adrian's men burst through the trees, weapons raised, surrounding the scene with ruthless precision. "Elena," Adrian said without looking away from Eric, "come to me." The words, the same whisper that calmed her son the night her world shattered, wrapped around her like a lifeline. Her legs moved before she willed them to, carrying her straight into the circle of safety his voice created. As she reached him, Adrian rose, shifting Matteo into her arms, his free hand sliding to the small of her back. "You're safe now," he whispered. And for the first time since the nightmare began, she believed him. The men dragged Eric away, shouting orders, the forest echoing with their movement. But Elena heard none of it. Her world had narrowed to the man standing before her, battered, breathing hard, eyes burning with the truth he could no longer deny. "Adrian," she whispered, tears trembling on her lashes. You're his father. Emotion flickered across his face. Fear, awe, guilt, longing, before settling into something deeper, something that looked dangerously like devotion. Yes, he breathed, and I'm never letting either of you go again. Mateo sighed softly in her arms, his breathing steady. The whisper that saved them still hung in the air, powerful enough to shift fate itself. Come to me, he had said. And she had. For several long, breathless seconds, the world stood still. The forest, once dark, merciless, echoing with danger, felt suspended in a strange, fragile quiet. Eleanor held Mateo tightly against her chest, her pulse trembling as Adrian's words settled over her, like something both terrifying and astonishing. He's mine. The truth beat through her like a second heartbeat, overwhelming and dizzying. She looked at Adrian, at the raw emotion flickering across his face, and felt something inside her break open, something tender, something aching, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. But the moment was short-lived. The security team dragged Eric deeper into the clearing, their footsteps harsh against the forest floor. He struggled, shouting threats, curses, words Elena refused to let seep into her heart. Adrian turned his head just slightly, jaw tightening, eyes narrowing as he watched the man who once held a claim on her life. The tension in the air sharpened again, reminding her that although truce had been spoken, the danger was far from over. Bring him, Adrian ordered quietly, deadly control weaving through every syllable. We're moving back to the estate. The guards nodded, their grips tightening on Eric as they forced him ahead. Adrian reached for Eleanor, not hesitating this time as his hand settled gently on her back. He didn't guide her. He held her, steadying her, grounding her. Are you all right? He whispered. She nodded, though her breath shook. Just overwhelmed. I know. His thumb brushed her shoulder unconsciously. We'll talk when you're safe. But as they turned to leave the forest, a low crack split the night. Not a stick, not an animal, a gun. Adrian reacted instantly, pulling Elena into his chest, shielding Mateo with his body as a bullet sliced through the air, embedding itself in a nearby tree with a vicious thud. Down! Adrian roared, pushing her behind the trunk for cover. Chaos erupted. Men shouted, guns raised, torches swung violently. Eric screamed something unintelligible as the guards yanked him to the ground. Another shot rang out, closer this time. Elena flinched, instinctively curling around Mateo while Adrian stayed pressed against her, shielding both of them with the full force of his body. They followed him, Adrian muttered, fury tightening every muscle. They're already here. Elena's heartbeat hammered against his chest. She could feel the tension in him, like a wire pulled too tight, threatening to snap. His breath grazed her hair, ragged with the weight of the moment. We need to move, he whispered. Stay with me. Don't let go. He shifted, crouching low, Mateo secured in his arms again. Elena held onto his coat, her fingers gripping desperately as they moved through the trees. Gunfire crackled behind them, echoing through the night. Adrian didn't look back. His only focus was her and the child who had, without either of them knowing, been his all along. One of Adrian's men shouted from the ridge. Boss! The ridge is compromised. We've got 2 shooters. Take them out, Adrian barked. No stray bullets. They want the baby alive. Elena's breath stilled. Alive? For what purpose? What secret lived in Mateo's body that made dangerous men hunt him like prey? They reached the clearing closest to the estate's outer wall, lit faintly by emergency floodlights. Reinforcements poured out from the mansion, forming a tight circle as Adrian rushed her forward. Open the gates, someone yelled. But before they reached the threshold, another shot fired, this time striking the ground inches from Eleanor's foot. She gasped, stumbling. Adrian caught her instantly, his arms wrapping around her, pulling her against him in a protective cradle. "Elena," he breathed urgently, "stay with me. Look at me." She lifted her gaze, eyes already stinging with tears. "I'm here," she whispered. And it wasn't a promise to herself, it was a promise to him. A shadow moved from the tree line. A man stepped forward, masked, armed, purposeful. The moon caught the edge of his weapon. "D'Angelo," he shouted, "give us the child and no one else has to die." Adrian's arms tightened around his son. Elena pressed closer, her body shaking. "No," Adrian growled, voice filled with lethal finality. "You will not touch what's mine." The man raised his gun. Adrian reacted before the shooter could even fire. A flash of movement, a sharp command, the explosive crack of return fire. One of Adrian's men struck the attacker down. The body collapsed into the leaves with a dull thud. Silence followed, but not peace. Adrian stayed still for a moment, holding Elena against him, his heart pounding so fiercely she could feel it through his chest. His breath hitched, not with fear for himself, but with fear of how close he had come to losing them. "We're going inside," he said finally, voice low, hoarse. "Now." Inside the estate, doors slammed shut. Locks clicked. Guards took positions. The world outside faded, but the weight inside the hall deepened. Adrian turned to her, running a trembling hand through his hair. Exhaustion, fury, and something more. Something painfully soft, etched itself into his expression. "Elena," he said quietly, "I need to speak to you alone." She nodded, following him into the safety of his private office. He shut the door behind them and finally turned to face her. "You walked away," he whispered, voice breaking at the edges. "I thought I lost you." Elena's lips parted. "I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me." He let out a breathless, aching laugh. "Elena, I would burn this world for you. I would drown it for him." Her throat tightened painfully. "I didn't want to be a burden." "You're not." His voice steadied, softening as he stepped closer. "You never were." She looked down at Matteo, asleep against her chest, peaceful in a way that made her own heart tremble. "Adrian," she whispered, "what do we do now?" He exhaled, slow and deep, the weight of his new reality settling visibly into his shoulders. "Now," he murmured, reaching out to touch Matteo's cheek with a reverent tenderness. "I protect him, and you, and I pay whatever price I must." Elena's breath stilled. "What price?" Adrian raised his eyes, dark, heavy, burning with a choice he'd already made. "I go to him," he said. "The man hunting our son, the man behind Eric." "No, Adrian." "It's the only way," he whispered. "He wants leverage, power, answers. He wants something only I can give." Elena stepped closer, tears rising. "You'll die." Adrian cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away her tears. "For you," he said softly, "I'd do worse." Her heart shattered completely. "Adrian, don't go." He leaned his forehead to hers, eyes closing. "Nothing matters more than keeping you safe," he whispered. "Nothing." Her tears fell freely. "Then let me come with you." "No." His voice broke. "I walk into danger alone. That is the choice I make." The choice that cost everything. The choice that would break them both. And the only choice that might save their son. The world did not end the night Adrian walked into danger alone. But for Elena, it felt as though it held its breath for far too long. The hours after he left were stretched, thin and fragile, trembling like the flicker of a candle flame. She stayed awake, sitting on the edge of Adrian's bed with Matteo curled against her chest, listening to the distant murmur of guards shifting positions and the occasional crackle of radio static. Every sound felt like a sign. Every silence felt like a warning. Every passing minute carved deeper into her heart. Adrian had left without hesitation, disappearing into the dark with that quiet, devastating promise in his eyes. "For you, I'd do worse." His words haunted her. She replayed them again and again, holding Matteo tighter each time, praying for a man who had become the anchor of her whole world without her realizing when it happened. The estate remained locked down, but a single window in the east wing remained open. Elena stood there long after midnight, watching the wind move through the trees, her fingers pressed against the glass as though touching the night might bring him back. The moon was high, silver and gentle, casting a soft glow over the grounds. It reminded her of the way. Adrian's eyes softened when he held Matteo. She closed her eyes, leaning her forehead against the cold surface, whispering a broken prayer she hoped the stars would carry to him. "Please come back to us." The world was quiet in a way that hurt. Matteo stirred, fussing lightly, but not crying the way he used to. His breathing stayed steady, peaceful, as if he knew Adrian didn't want him to cry tonight. Elena rocked him gently, her heart aching with a tenderness that made it hard to breathe. She whispered soothing words, but she knew she was speaking to fill the silence left in Adrian's absence. Hours passed like this, slow, aching, suspended. When dawn finally broke, it arrived gently, brushing soft gold across the estate. Light seeped into the room, warming her face, warming Matteo's tiny hand as it curled against her chest. But the warmth didn't ease her worry. If anything, it made her realize how long he had been gone. She stepped into the hallway, searching for answers, finding only guards with tense shoulders and tired eyes. None spoke unless she asked. None knew enough to ease her heart. One guard finally approached, voice low and careful. "Miss Eleanor." He made contact. Her knees nearly gave out. "Is he alive?" "Yes," the guard said. "He's alive." It wasn't enough. "Is he hurt?" A pause. "He didn't say." Of course he didn't. Adrian never admitted pain while standing. The knowledge both warmed and broke her. She returned to the room, clutching Matteo close, trying to stay strong for him. Minutes blurred again. Time folded into itself. Her heart beat in a slow, painful rhythm, one that echoed with yearning. Then, sometime after sunrise, the front door opened. Quietly, softly. Not the way guards moved, not the way danger arrived, but the way a man returned home. Eleanor felt it before she heard it, an instinct, a tug deep in her chest. She stood from the bed with Matteo in her arms and moved toward the hallway, breath trembling with every step. Her bare feet whispered against the floor, her pulse racing as she followed the faint hum of voices. And then she saw him. Adrian stood in the foyer, his black coat damp with morning dew, his hair disheveled, his breath visible in the cool air. A cut marked his cheek, another bruise darkened his jaw, dirt smeared his hands. His shoulders were tense, his stance unsteady, as though the world's weight still pressed against him. But he was alive. His eyes lifted, searching, desperate, until they found her. The relief that washed through his expression was raw, unguarded, almost painful to witness. "Elena," he breathed. That one word broke her. Tears spilled before she even realized she was crying. She stepped forward, faster and faster, until she nearly crashed into him. Adrian caught her instantly, his hands steadying her back, his forehead falling against hers with a shaking exhale. "You're safe," she whispered, voice cracking. His arms gathered, her close, drawing both her and Matteo into the shelter of his body. "I told you," he murmured, breath warm against her hair. "I'd come back." Her arms circled his waist, clinging to him with all the fear she'd held through the night. I thought. "I know," he whispered, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. I never wanted you to feel that again. Matteo stirred, lifting his tiny hand toward Adrian's chest, making a soft sound that melted something deep inside him. Adrian pulled back just enough to look at his son. His eyes softened in a way Eleanor had only seen once before. The night he whispered, "Come to me." He touched Matteo's cheek with trembling fingers. "Hey, little man, I'm here." Matteo cooed, calm and content. Elena watched the moment, her heart tightening with a mixture of awe and something deeper, something like belonging. "What happened out there?" she asked softly. Adrian exhaled, pressing his forehead briefly against Matteo's. "I ended it," he said. "All of it. No one's coming for you again." Her breath caught. "Adrian, it's over," he whispered. "And if it ever returns, it will face me first." Silence settled around them, warm, fragile, healing. She cupped his cheek, thumb brushing the bruise. "You didn't have to do that alone." His gaze softened. "I wanted you safe more than I wanted myself safe." She felt her chest swell and ache and soften all at once. "Adrian, what happens now?" He stepped closer, his hand sliding to the back of her neck in a gesture so tender she nearly melted. "Now," he whispered, "we heal. We breathe. We learn how to be a family." Her lips parted. "A family?" His eyes flicked to Matteo, then back to her, filled with a depth she had never seen. "If you'll have me." A tear slipped down her cheek, slow, warm, unforced. "I've had you," she whispered, "from the moment you whispered his first calm into the world." He kissed her forehead softly, reverently. "Eleanor." She leaned into his touch. "I'm here." Matteo yawned, settling comfortably between them as though the three of them had always belonged in this quiet, intimate space. The world outside the mansion was still dangerous, chaotic, unpredictable. But here, in the hush of morning light, in the warmth of Adrian's arms, in the steady beat of the heart she'd come to trust, everything felt gentle, soft, safe, new. And somewhere in the quiet between their heartbeats, love, tender, patient, unspoken, began again.